Good afternoon. My name is John Fox. I'm a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Spokane. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to give you a special weather briefing for the upcoming winter system, which is going to impact much of the inland Northwest over the next several days. So let's start out taking a look at what the impacts are going to be. This is just a general overview. And we expect the storm system, which is currently off the coast right now, it's going to move inland over the next 24 hours or so. We'll start to feel the initial impacts on Friday with some light snow beginning initially in the North Cascades and then spreading across far northern portions of Washington into the North Idaho Panhandle. Although we expect most of this precipitation to fall as snow, temperatures above freezing and road temperatures at freezing or warmer will initially result in mainly wet roads, maybe some brief slushy accumulations. But as we get into the afternoon hours, we expect most of the snow to melt when it hits the roads. So the storm is going to start on Friday, but we really expect things to spin up by the time we get to Friday night and Saturday. That's as the low pressure system begins to move a little closer to the area and it interacts with an intrusion of Arctic air moving out of Canada sometime either late Friday afternoon or more likely Friday evening. As that colder air begins to interact with the storm system off the coast, it'll set up a perfect condition for widespread snow across the area. We do expect moderate snow across portions of the inland Northwest, and we'll show you exactly where we expect to see the biggest snow amounts to occur. We're also expecting colder temperatures. We're expecting to see stronger north to northeast winds, producing areas of blowing and drifting snow. And that cold air is going to become firmly entrenched by the time we get to Saturday. That's when we expect the snow to begin winding down, but by that point the temperatures will begin to drop quite a bit. We're looking for very cold temperatures for mid-March. We'll see areas of blowing and drifting, and we'll see the winds as well. By the time we get to Saturday night, the cold air will be firmly entrenched. However, the low pressure system is going to move out of the area. That means we expect the snow threat to begin to wind down overnight. We'll be set for some very cold temperatures overnight with lows generally in the teens to lower 20s, but we will still see some winds on the back edge of that Arctic front, which will still produce some bitter wind chills across the region. There is a threat of some light snow across far southern portions of Washington. By the time we get into Sunday, the low pressure system is even further away. We'll still maintain a little bit of cold winds coming out of the north to northeast, but they will decrease through the day. Light snow again will be possible, quite a bit lighter than what we're expecting over the Friday night and Saturday period, and most of that's going to be south of Highway 2. Moving on, we're going to show you a map of where we expect the biggest impacts to be. We're generally looking at red areas where we expect to see warning conditions for the heaviest snow or perhaps the strongest winds. Orange conditions would be for moderate impacts, what we call advisory level impacts, lighter snow amounts, maybe lesser winds. And then finally, minor impacts would be areas shaded in yellow. There may be some impacts, but generally we're expecting lighter winds and lesser snow amounts. So overlooking the whole general area, we expect to see the biggest snow amounts in these areas shaded in red. That would include Wenatchee, Omak, Republic, Bonners Ferry, Colville, Sandpoint, and those areas. That's where we expect to see the heaviest snow amounts occurring. We would expect to see strong winds coming down the Purcell Trench from Bonners Ferry to Sandpoint, as well as down the Okanagan Valley and onto the Waterville Plateau. That's where we expect to issue the winter storm warnings for our biggest impacts. These areas in orange, including Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, and Moses Lake, will see advisory level impacts. We could see some snow amounts, but they shouldn't be heavy. We'll also see some pretty good periods of wind as well, and we'll show you exactly what sort of winds we're expecting. Finally, the area which will be least impacted by this storm will be down in the LC Valley, perhaps the Blue Mountains and Camas Prairie, where the bulk of the snow is going to avoid. We also don't expect to see a lot of wind in those areas either. This is just a brief overlook of all the locations or all the major cities across the inland Northwest. If you want to pause the video and look at these in detail, go ahead. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. So let's move forward. The main thing to look at is the main impacts are going to be for those northern valleys, including Sandpoint, Bonners Ferry, and Colville. And here's your general timeline for when we expect the impacts. All right, well, let's get down to the snow totals. We're going to start off, like I said, the snow is going to begin on Friday morning, most likely in the Cascades, and slowly spread eastward across the remainder of the forecast area. Generally speaking, the snow amounts will be less than 1 to 2 inches generally quite a bit less than that over most valley locations. And despite what we're showing on the map here, we expect that the road temperatures are going to be warm enough, plus the temperatures just below the roads are most likely warm enough that whatever falls during the day on Friday might have a hard time accumulating, with the exceptions of perhaps Lookout Pass, Stevens and Snoqualmie passes as well. Not shown on here, we would have Sherman Pass, but certainly they would see some snow impacts as well, beginning as early as Friday. But where we think things are really going to spin up is for this Friday night period. This most likely will be our heaviest snow period during this upcoming event. We're expecting anywhere from 2 to 3 inches of snow across the northern valleys from Republic to Colville to Sandpoint. Also some heavier snow across the Cascades, onto the Waterville Plateau, and maybe higher portions of the Okanagan Valley. Also looks like Mission Ridge is going to see quite a bit of snow as well. So that's your snow story for Friday night. That will most likely be the heaviest period for snow. And keep in mind, we expect those winds to begin to develop during this period as well, and that'll produce its own set of problems, which we'll discuss later. As we move ahead to Saturday, the storm system is going to be weakening or moving away from our area, and as a result, we're only expecting additional snow amounts to be in the 1-inch range or generally less. So the impacts from snow won't be big at that point, but by this point we do expect to see the winds really picking up quite a bit. So we could see obviously areas of blowing and drifting snow throughout much of Saturday. So here is our most likely snow amount. This is our official snow forecast. We're just picking numbers here. Don't look specifically at the number itself. There's probably more of a range. So for instance, in Spokane, we might see 1 to 3 inches, 2 to 4 inches, something like that. We're not guaranteeing we'll see 3 inches in these areas. But this is just the general outlook. This is our best or most likely outcome for this event. So you can see many valley locations ranging anywhere from 2 to 5 inches, generally north of Highway 2. As you go farther south, lighter amounts for sure, and we're expecting heavier amounts near the mountains, as I've already mentioned. So that's our most likely snow forecast, but we can also break it down into probabilistic forecasts. In this case, we're showing that there's a 90% chance of seeing at least this much snow. So again, if we look at Spokane or Coeur d'Alene, we're expecting at least a 90% chance of 1 inch of snow or greater. And you can look at the rest of the numbers across the area to see what our low amount snow forecast is going to be. On the other end of the spectrum, this is our high-end forecast. There's a 10% chance of the snowfall reaching these amounts. We think our confidence is higher as you go closer to the Cascades of possibly achieving these amounts. So places like the Waterville Plateau, Methow Valley, Plain, Mazama, Leavenworth, places like that would see better chances of nearing these conditions, although it's not really expected. But if it is going to happen, that's where we think our best chances would be at this point. Again, look at this at your leisure, but it does show what we would call our worst case scenario, or a 10% chance of seeing snowfall amounts up to this amount. So moving forward, we've hit upon the snow totals, but what about the winds? As I said previously, as that Arctic air mass begins moving in, we would expect to see the winds begin picking up either late Friday afternoon or Friday evening. They'll initially come out of the Okanagan Valley out of the north, or out of the Purcell Trench from Sandpoint to Coeur d'Alene out of the northeast. And they're really going to pick up. We expect to see the peak wind speeds either late Friday night or Saturday morning. If you look here, these areas in orange are where we expect to see the strongest winds developing. So as you can imagine, when we see winds like this with some fresh snowfall, and we do expect this snowfall to be rather light and fluffy owing to the cold air moving in, that there is certainly a good potential for seeing some blowing and drifting snow. But again, we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's stick with the temperatures. These are our temperatures. By the time we get to Saturday morning, we're looking at low temperatures in the single digits and teens across much of the inland northwest. You mix that in with the winds that we have forecast, and we're looking at sub-zero wind chill values in all the areas shaded in purple, including the West Plains, certainly much of the North Idaho Panhandle, some of the northern valleys here across north central and northeast Washington. As you get farther to the south and east, those winds won't be quite as strong and the temperatures won't be quite as cold. But again, we're expecting the coldest wind chills to occur somewhat in the northeast portion of our forecast area for the Friday night, Saturday morning period. As we get into the daytime hours, the winds will begin to decrease a little bit, but we're looking at some very cold daytime temperatures. These are the forecasts that we're showing. A lot of these values would be at record or near record levels for this time of year. There's quite a few areas that actually don't get above freezing at all on this Saturday, which would be fairly unusual for the middle of March, to say the least. By the time we get into Sunday morning or late Saturday night, the winds will start to decrease, but again, we're left with some rather cold temperatures across the region. We're looking at temperatures in the single digits to the teens across much of the inland Northwest. Some of these will be near record values for this time of year. Again, the good news is the winds won't be quite as strong by the time we get to this period of the forecast. But even so, with those colder temperatures and still a bit of northeast to northerly winds, we're looking at single-digit wind chills across much of the area, with below zero wind chills in these areas shaded in purple for that Saturday night into early Sunday period. So perhaps this might be the biggest impact of the forecast. We've seen events like this before where we see a light fluffy snow from an Arctic event accompanied by strong north to northeast winds. And as a result, you can get areas of blowing and drifting snow. The areas most susceptible to it we expect to be east-west running roads, including I-90 and Highway 2. One area of concern, I think our highest concern perhaps, might be across the Waterville Plateau as those winds come howling out of the north at about 30 to 40 mile per hour gusts sometime during the storm event. And we expect, without a lot of tree cover in those areas, that area will be especially susceptible to some blowing and drifting snow along Highway 2. Other areas of concern would be across the Columbia Basin, Okanagan Valley, and perhaps the Purcell Trench as well. Our confidence for seeing some blowing snow is low to moderate. It's just a question of where it's going to occur. We're not quite sure, and the system is set up for the potential, certainly in this case. All right, in addition to the temperature threat and the wind threat and all that, there's concerns for more than just humans. We're concerned with the livestock. There are newborn livestock out there right now, and they will be susceptible to seeing these very cold temperatures for this time of year. With 10 below zero to 10 above zero wind chills, this will cause problems for susceptible livestock. Also, some agriculture. We've gotten some reports of some early budding on trees, and certainly this cold weather with hard freeze conditions expected isn't going to help their situation as we move forward into the weekend. The good news is this cold does not stick around for long. These are 7-day temperature forecasts for high temperatures. You'll notice that we bottom out on Saturday, but as we go through the middle of the week, each day we see successive warming, and by the time we get to the middle of the week, we're looking at high temperatures somewhere in the upper 40s to mid 50s, and that will melt whatever snow happens to fall. We didn't show it here, but our low temperatures still remain below freezing for each of these days, just based on the fact that the air mass behind this Arctic front is going to be so dry. So we would expect to see lows generally in the teens to lower 20s through that period. So in summary, we put together this timeline for you just to look at. We won't go over all the elements, but what I want you to pick up on is the fact that we expect to see our highest impacts between the Friday night and Saturday period. That's when we'd expect to see the heaviest snow, the strongest winds, the best potential for blowing and drifting snow. By the time we get into Saturday night, the winds will begin to decrease, but we're stuck with that cold air. By the time we get to Sunday, still cold, but the threat of snow, or at least moderate snow, begins to decrease substantially. And by the time we get to Monday, it looks like this will just be a distant memory as we start to warm up the temperatures from this point on. Thank you very much for attending our briefing, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.